But we are people, we are not the government. We are not doing nothing. If the government does something wrong with this government, we are not responsible, American and Iranian. What they can do. Why I have to be punished for somebody else's problem? I don't know what I have to do. We run away from the Iranian country. They do something like this, but we didn't know we're going to have the same situation here. I'm a U.S. citizen about 15, 20 years old, yes. And my brother didn't do nothing wrong in no place in the world. And I didn't do nothing wrong.
That's just one of the many stories we're hearing from people around the world affected by U.S. President Donald Trump's new travel ban.
The executive order bans travel from 7 majority Muslim countries for 90 days, while the U.S. government says it intends to improve security screening.
All refugee admissions are blocked for 120 days. Refugees from Syria are banned indefinitely, and the number of refugees to be resettled this year was cut in half to about 50,000. Here to help us talk about this on the stream, we're joined by Jan Egeland, Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council. He's in Oslo, Norway. Abid Ayub is the Policy and Legal Director for the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. And Loida George is an immigration attorney. She's right here in Washington, D.C. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you here. Jan, as you were watching this story unfold from outside of the United States, how do you unpack it? How do you make sense of what's going on right now?
It's very hard to understand what this president really wants to do. He says he wants to make America safer. I think he is not making America safer at all. I think he's making America smaller. It's making America meaner. And he's doing it more difficult for us who do international refugee and humanitarian work to do our job.
Abid, your attorneys have been out and about at airports helping people. There was a story about a family from Yemen. Tell us that story. It gives us a sense of what's really happening this side of the Atlantic.
This side it's complete chaos. There's many stories. The story you are touching on is a family from Yemen that flew into Dulles Airport. They had 2 U.S. citizen children, but the rest of the family were green card holders, visa holders. There was a mix. And the whole family wasn't able to go through. The U.S. citizen children were not able to go back to school. They were sent back. They were sent back to Yemen. So these are the types of stories we're hearing about every day from all these countries of different things that are happening and impacting different people.
We actually got one of those stories firsthand. This is a video comment we got from someone named Ida Shihabi, and she explains what this has meant for her cheerfully in this comment, as you'll see. Take a look.
My name is Ida. I have been accepted as a PhD student in Arkansas University, and my clearance process in the U.S. Embassy has finished in 19th of January. But today I have received a news that we have been refused, and all of my efforts and time have been destroyed.
So Loida, she worked hard, she got into a prestigious program, and then the doors are shut. You can see, I mean, the emotion on her face, and I know you've been speaking to other people about, 1, the uncertainty, and then 2, what this then does mean for them in their lives.
Absolutely, and I mean, her story is unfortunately not unique. It's replicated with individuals throughout the region that is impacted by this ban. Whether it's professionally or personally, I've had this impact my life. When I say personally, I mean friends and colleagues. I have a friend stuck in Dubai right now. He has legal permanent status right now, and he's not able to board a plane. These are just anecdotes, but it's real. And for folks that say that the residuals of or the impact of Trump's ban is just rhetoric, it's just what he said to get in power, it's real. It's not rhetoric. It wasn't just talk.
See, the White House heard some of these critiques and they responded pretty much immediately. Here's Sean Spicer, he's the White House spokesperson, and here's how he was responding to some of the most critical comments about the executive order on immigration. Have a listen.
In a 24-hour period, 325,000 people from other countries flew in through our airports, and we're talking about 109 people from 7 countries that the Obama administration identified. And these career bureaucrats have a problem with it. I think that they should either get with the program or they can go.
Jan, so basically Sean Spicer is saying that it's not really impacting that many people. How many people do you think the ripples could amount to? He's saying 109.
Well, maybe on that very day, that very hour, but the long-term effect could be enormous. I mean, it's a number of important countries here. I mean, Iran, Syria, Iraq, big countries, important countries with very important talent, several African countries, etc., that we need in the West, that the US need. These countries need also contact with the United States. So the long-term effect could be very bad on both sides. And let's not forget also the poor refugees that were bound to be resettled in the US. We who work with refugees, the Norwegian Refugee Council, among them, we have 10,000 field workers working with millions and millions of displaced people. We need that countries like the US take some few for resettlement. So when the US leads this race to the bottom to avoid international responsibility, the ripple effect would be that all other countries would say, well, if the US doesn't need to share in the responsibility, why should I share in the responsibility? Why shouldn't also I close the border to my country?
Trump is a businessman. He's going to look at this through numbers. And by putting those numbers out there, he's trying to convince himself, oh, this is not having that big of an impact. This is a great return on this program. And they kind of convince themselves that these folks are just numbers, that there's no stories. But as you mentioned, these are real stories. These are individuals that are impacted, that can't go back to school, as we saw in that clip. Surgeons that can't go back to operate on patients in the US. And the other thing that's important to keep in mind is they're not keeping track of how many individuals are prevented from boarding the airplane. So this has got two phases: the folks that are coming in to the country that are turned away or detained, and then you have at the other end of the international airports, you have LPRs, lawful permanent residents, and green card holders. You have visa holders and special visa holders who are told, sorry, you can't board, despite buying an airline ticket. Now these airlines are making the decisions for the immigration system here, which I don't think it's their authority to do so.
But I hear you there, but we got two tweets, and they're really backing up what we just heard from Sean Spicer. So I'm going to throw these to you. This is Bliss, who says, why the fuss? Trump is only trying to put his house in order, and the ban is not permanent. Another person picks up on that last line. This is Collins, who says, make sure you stay fair on this issue. There is plenty of support on a quote-unquote 90-day moratorium from all races and religions. So people saying, one, this is necessary for security, and two, it's only for 90 days.
It's in my opinion, it's not necessary for security. Since 1975, in the United States, visa holders from these countries have killed 0 Americans within the U.S. since 1975. These folk, this is not about security. The individuals coming from these countries don't represent a security threat here in the United States of America. So it's a nonsense argument. And the 90-day moratorium, we don't know with this administration what that means. And you got to remember, the order also had sections for an entry-exit registration system, which is similar to NSEERS that we saw immediately post 9/11.
Exactly, and NSEERS was stopped because it was deemed to be non-effective.
And that was a national security entry-exit registration system, which was implemented immediately after 9/11, about fears about terrorists, potential terrorists coming into the United States.
Right.
And that had some pushback. Let me give you pushback from the administration. The current US administration, Reince Priebus, is the White House Chief of Staff. And he said that there were genuine security concerns. Have a listen.
If you're coming in and out of one of those 7 countries, by the way, identified by the Obama administration as the 7 most dangerous countries in the world in regard to harboring terrorists, and affirmed by Congress multiple times, then you're going to be subjected temporarily with more questioning until a better program is put in place over the next several months. This is something that 75–80% of Americans out there agree with. We don't want people that are traveling back and forth to one of these 7 countries that harbor terrorists to be traveling freely back and forth between the United States and those countries.
Jan, you must deal with this issue with refugees all of the time. How do you reassure countries that security isn't an issue, or how to work around that?
what the administration is saying here is, of course, complete nonsense. Take Syrian refugees that have been now suspended indefinitely. It's the most vetted people that will come to the United States. I mean, businessmen from Europe would be more dangerous. Businessmen within the United States traveling from one state to the other would be much more dangerous because there has been more violence from them. The Syrian refugees, mostly women and children, have been fleeing from terror. They come because of what ISIS and other bad men with guns have done. They seek refuge and protection in the United States, and then Trump says, no, you're not welcome. It's exactly what happened in 1939 when bad politicians told the population that receiving Jewish children from Nazi Germany in 1939 would be dangerous, and a majority of the population said, okay, so we shouldn't do it. History proved that to be wrong. History will prove that this is wrong.
Yeah, and I hear you there. There's someone here who would agree with you. This is Nafizi on Twitter. He says, refugees from those 7 countries bear the burden of 2 tragedies, that of U.S.-led invasion at home and a U.S. travel ban on the other hand. Loida, I know that you work specifically with people who are granted special visas. They're actually called special immigrant visas, Iraqi interpreters, Afghan interpreters. We've done a whole show on really the challenges and difficulties they face after working for the U.S. Military. What are they telling you?
Well, right now the tragedy, I kind of want to backpedal on this idea of, but for this ban, there would be unfettered entry into the United States. As the immigrant visa application process stands right now, it's probably individuals from those countries and beyond in the Middle East probably have the hardest time getting a visa. So the idea that,
Can you share that with us? Because I mean, this is what you do on a daily basis.
Right.
What do you mean by the hardest time?
Well, let me give you a perfect example. Right. One of my SIV clients, again, special immigrant visas, he was an Iraqi interpreter. He served hand in hand, side by side with the Department of Defense soldiers on the ground, risked his life. At the same time, he will never go home again. And so he now is in the United States. He's petitioned for his family members to join. He's got one remaining family member, which is his father, an elderly gentleman. He's 70 years old. He won't be able to come under this moratorium. And mind you, if we, again, backpedaling a little bit, it's been 2 years that we've been trying to get him in. And it's that long because he's being vetted right now. And so this idea that but for this ban that folks from these parts of the world would just be rushing in and wreaking havoc, I think it's very false. It's a very false narrative.
Let me just bring in President Donald Trump and what he said recently about his executive order and why he stands by it. Take a look.
It's not a Muslim ban, but we were totally prepared. It's working out very nicely. You see it at the airports, you see it all over. It's working out very nicely, and we're going to have a very, very strict ban, and we're going to have extreme vetting, which we should have had in this country for many years.
Yeah, and if you had a chance to have a conversation with President Trump, what would you tell him about how nicely this ban is working out?
Well, first, I mean, it is chaotic. Republican senators themselves say that the one thing that was not vetted was this executive order. That should have been vetted, and then, diplomats and experts would say it's nonsense. Don't do it. Among other things, refugees, the least dangerous people that would come to the United States. Secondly, let's work together against terror. Yes, could the US please lead us in the fight against terrorists and terror? Could you please work with intelligence services around the world, find these groups, infiltrate them, do all that is needed to fight terror, but don't punish the weak and the innocent, the refugees, students, people seeking refuge in the United States. What he's doing is punishing the victims of terror. And I also think those who say that this is actually a gift to the terrorists are correct. there will be so much anger, so much bitterness, such a feeling of discrimination here that it will fuel extremism. So let's hope that Europe, the rest of the West, will stand up and say, stop it, roll back this thing.
But I wonder what you make of Jan's last point there, because there's someone on Twitter who says exactly the same thing. Ritu says, extreme vetting of refugees, as noted by Trump, cannot address the problems of the forms of quote-unquote terrorism. This might become a new IS, Islamic State, so-called Islamic State propaganda. Do you see this feeding into their aims and their goals?
It does feed into the propaganda, but I would just touch on one point. As far as talking or continuing the war on terror against these terror groups, that's what got us here in the first place. It was bad decisions by the government and by this government to go into Iraq and continue this war on terror. So we have to be careful, and we have to take a look at what policies led to the development of what we're seeing with these terror groups in the U.S. But you're right, these folks should not be caught in the middle of it. The refugees go through a 2 to 3 year vetting process before they're in the U.S. Don't tie in immigration and refugees with national security in your fight on terror. That's gonna lead to chaos like we're seeing now.
Lottie, let me share something from your Twitter feed here. Let's be clear on our reality. Don't let the propaganda machine eat your sane brain. And I'm going to click to your link here, which I've seen this many times. Number of Americans killed annually by Islamic jihadist immigrants, 2, far right-wing terrorists, 5, and then down here, lawnmowers, 69. And it's almost laughable about the extent of perhaps the reaction to what the reality is on the ground. How do you make sense of this as an immigration lawyer?
Well, it's hard. I don't have answers for when clients call and say, what's next? I honestly don't have any idea. What has happened has just blindsided. I think all of us assumed or presumed that this was just rhetoric on the campaign trail. This has turned into action, and it's scary on the ground for folks that are actually impacted. And let me also add that it's counterintuitive to the idea of protecting us, especially when you've got folks that are risking life and limb to act as facilitators to U.S. soldiers on the ground. Where's the incentive now to support U.S. troops if we will turn our backs on them? And that's exactly what's happening with this ban. And I think it's clearly not a well thought out, not a well vetted, as Jan was saying, ban at all.
Jan, I want to widen this out just a little bit, because there are people in our community and beyond who are saying there are greater potential implications of this. We actually got a video comment from one of those people. This is Lisbeth out of Denmark, and she wonders if this might have a ripple effect. Have a listen.
Hello, this is Lisbeth Zornig Andersen from Copenhagen. The consequences in Denmark right now of President Trump's ban of Muslim refugees is that the most right-wing parties in Denmark want to go further than him. They want a total ban of Muslim refugees in Denmark. So it's looking really bad.
Jan, is this indicative of a greater shift in thinking on refugee policy?
I hope not. I hope not. But listen, it's not just Trump. It's one country after the other that have built walls against asylum seekers. Europe has specialized in barbed wire and walls. I just myself found out that Uganda in Africa takes more refugees, welcomes more refugees per day than most European countries take asylum seekers and refugees per year. So it's not, it's what's new here is that Trump is leading this race to the bottom among all of these countries that are having leaders that are fueling xenophobia. What we need would be leaders who, like Justin Trudeau. Let's take some great leaders. I mean, there are small leaders like Trump. There are also great leaders. Justin Trudeau in Canada says, refugees welcome. Muslims, you help build this Canada with us. We love you. He did that after a white supremacist killed Muslims.
Jan,
We need that
I
kind of
hear what you're saying, but I'm also looking at a headline here, which seems like it's disagreeing with you, or the reality down on the ground where you are sitting right now is very different. This is the local. Record deportation figures weren't enough for Norway. Let me just click on another story here. Germany to deport asylum seekers back to Greece. One more here. France prosecuting citizens for crimes of solidarity. So they are trying to help refugees and immigrants, and they're being prosecuted. Is there is there a disconnect between what you are saying and what the ordinary people of Europe are feeling right now that's actually perhaps being reflected by people in the United States too?
So what I just said was that there are very many European countries who are not passing the test of humanity these days or upholding the refugee law. I mean, the Refugee Convention came after the Second World War because Europeans were refugees, and therefore we were encoding asylum rights. Now we're leading, you know, in a way, we're being burial agents for the same Refugee Convention. But of course, say, for example, these asylum seekers now return to Afghanistan. We find that, you know, really a harsh policy, but they have been tried 2 or 3 times through the court system. That's another thing than having a total ban on all refugees from Syria, a total ban on all refugees, period, after having been vetted for 2 years. That's extreme measure, what comes now from Trump.
So the what comes now is actually something people are debating. I want to share a few tweets on my screen. This is Philip Lewis, a journalist for Huffington Post out of Detroit, showing scenes from just a few days ago, people protesting against the quote-unquote Muslim ban. That was a hashtag that was being used. Here's another one from our own producer, Nagin, who was at the airport here in the Washington, D.C. area, where thousands were gathered there to welcome arrivals. And this last one out of LAX, volunteer attorneys trying to find families waiting for possibly detained relatives in California. Loida, you saw this overwhelming reaction from people when they heard about the executive order. Where do you think this goes from here?
Well, many good attorneys are on the ground trying to work against this from a legal perspective. There are injunctions in 4 different courts around the U.S. They unfortunately that's not the end of the story. Undoubtedly, the administration will counter these injunctions, and then it will more than likely go on to the next court, which is the circuit courts, and from there, if it's still challenged, on to the Supreme Court. In the interim, we're not too sure what's going to happen. We're presuming that Trump will continue with the letter of the lingo in this ban. So in the time being, though, there's some flexibility. They're rolling back on.
Have you seen a situation like this anywhere else, anytime else? Is there context for this?
Not in the U.S.
So this is a first. Abid, this is
Not
a first.
in the U.S.
You've never
It's the
seen
first
this before.
time. I've never seen this before. Read about this happening in the U.S. and you got to remember it did play out in lifetime with social media. And we were talking the attorneys. You mentioned the lawyers, and just a quick response from the attorneys. Yeah. To coordinate over social media and using technology to get out there and help these folks. It was an immediate response.
Can attorneys on their laptops sitting at airports be an influence on an administration, a brand new administration?
Well, look, everybody's going to have a role to play. This is a multi-layered fight. So the attorneys, the immediate services to these individuals is important. That's what our organization has been doing. We've talked to almost well over 1,000 individuals. So we need the organizations to bring these litigations and take this fight into the court to the higher levels.
Abid Ayub, Jan Egeland, Loida George, I'm hoping that I'll be able to drag you online to stream.aljazeera.com for our post show. Please join us there too. If you have a comment to add to our conversation, hashtag AJStream. We'll see you online. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Take care. Hello show again, we're talking about the new travel ban in the United States. At the end of the show, I just mentioned to our two legal guests in the studio, have you seen anything like this before? Jan, have you seen anything quite like this before? Any other country that's done something quite similar?
I haven't seen it in any liberal democracy like this before. I think. There is a lot of there are travel bans. There are terrible things happening at borders in many countries.
Yeah. Actually, now as a British Nigerian, I'm thinking about when one dictator sent Ghanaians home. They just upped and sent them home. Okay, so yes, there are examples. But
and I think Israelis, Jews have had
Yeah.
problems through generations. So it's not easy to travel on an Israeli passport. I mean, there are other cases, but this is the leader, so-called, of the free world, and that's what makes it really, really very dangerous.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's also as difficult to travel on a Palestinian passport as well as what we're seeing. And this has.
Do you have, Abid?
I'm American, born and raised in Detroit, so
right.
I'm okay. The ban doesn't apply. Yeah,
so happy right now.
But look, we've seen such acts against humanity in the past. I think the shocking part from this is it's coming from the United States of America, which has done some horrible things, but it's still found a way to shock and surprise many people at how bad it can get over here.
So I want to share a little bit of pushback because we are getting it. It's in the minority, I would say, from those who are tweeting us. But Ifantas says Americans should give Trump a break. He's not banning for his benefit, but for the benefit of Americans. So as pushback to that, we actually got a video comment. This is from a permanent resident. This is Sema. And she explained to us what this is doing to her, stuck here in the U.S. and not being able to travel. Have a listen.
I was trying to go to London in 2 days from now on Thursday. Unfortunately, I can't anymore. Although the executive order says those who are lawful permanent residents in the United States can travel outside the United States and can come back, however, they might be subject to extra interviews or extra questioning. And maybe you would be denied re-entry to the United States. Now, I thought to myself, do I really want to risk my 5 years of refugee application process just to go to London for a few days? Now, mind you, I am a journalist and I am a traveler, which means I do travel a lot for work and for leisure. And now, for the next 90 days, I am here in the United States, can't go anywhere, and I have to cancel all of my next travel plans.
So Leda, there is a hint of privilege in her comment, but she's also an Iraqi journalist and an Iraqi refugee who is here. There's been confusion on what this will mean for green card holders, permanent residents. Will they or won't they? And then has that trickled down to actual border officials at airports and whether or not they know those rules? What are you telling people who are actual residents?
I'm telling people that if you're a national of any one of the 7 banned countries, do not get on a plane. There's just too much ambiguity about how this actually will play out. As we've discussed, it wasn't well.
Full disclosure, we actually had an email at our office and we were told, if you come from any of these 7 countries, don't travel.
Yeah, and that's what I'm telling my clients, that's what my colleagues are saying, and it's real. And the language doesn't make it clear that even if you do have legal residency, you can come back in. There's suggestions that you'll need a waiver to be able to enter. But then what agency is actually going to be reviewing the waiver? What does that waiver look like? There's no directive on how this will play out. So we just tell folks, stay put.
Yeah, and what are you telling your staff?
What we have to tell our staff now is that this could be a game changer. My organization employs many hundreds of Syrians, Iraqis, quite a few Iranians, very many Somalis, very many in Yemen, etc. We would like to bring them to bring testimony to donors in the United States, to the World Bank. We would like to make our refugee and humanitarian work more effective. This could be much more difficult for us to help the victims of terror. So this is the irony here. An initiative which is supposedly making America safe from terror is only hurting the victims of terror, because it makes it more difficult for us to help the victims of terror, who are the refugees and the displaced.
I guess I've been hearing you trying to make sense of what's happening in the United States right now, all the way through the program. And I'm wondering whether the answer might be with Scott Lepore. Scott Lepore is a Republican official in Florida, and this is what he told Al Jazeera recently. Have a listen.
When they get here, they want to burn the American flag, tell us how much they don't like our democracy, and you got certain areas in Michigan, in the upstate area, that want to have Sharia law. It can't happen. We're Americans. And Donald Trump's election was basically the second civil war in this country.
The certain area in Michigan he's talking about is my hometown of Dearborn. And look, we didn't want Sharia law. I mean, if you want to come to Dearborn and you want to check what Dearborn is, trust me, the last thing they're doing out in Dearborn is advocating for Sharia law in Dearborn. It's a well-developed city. It's a great hometown. And this could be said about Muslims across the country. So this talk and using this scare tactic of a Sharia law and burning the flags, it's just not true.
Is America afraid of Muslims? Or I suppose I should say, is the new administration, are they afraid of Muslims?
I think it's the new administration. Look, we have seen still a part of this country stand up against this ban, go out to the airports, protest. So I won't put all Americans under that umbrella, but you do have a segment that this administration tapped into and is exploiting this fear through such policies.
All right, let's just fast forward, just to wrap up, guess. 90 days from now, Abid.
90 days from
Yes,
now,
what do you think?
you will see another entry-exit registration system, and I believe you'll see additional, the Muslim registry will be brought up forward, and I think you'll see additional countries added to that list, and the moratorium on Syrian refugees won't be lifted.
Oh, I hear pessimism there. Loida, 90 days from now.
I don't know that we're going to have any clear sense of resolution, and outside of comprehensive immigration reform, this type of hysteria may go on indefinitely.
Yeah, and I'm tapping into your vast experience. Where do you think we might be by April?
Well, 90 days from us, I mean, from now depends on us as well. You know, if a lot of decent human beings now wake up and try to voice their dissent, go to their congressman and woman, you know, go to their foreign leader in my country, and etc., and we say that this is nonsense. It doesn't make America safe. It makes America small and mean. I think it could change. What I see now is that a lot of apathy has gone away, and there is a lot of energy now for people to fight again for refugees, for the vulnerable, and also bring the facts forward. We want to fight terror. We want to prevent terror, but we don't want to go after scapegoats, those who have nothing to do with terror, say refugees, or the kind of immigrants that students and others that this is hurting.
90 days, I'll throw that to our community as well because they're answering that same question. Ikpema on Twitter says Trump's ban for 90 days is short, but it's a lifetime for affected countries, wasted dreams and resources that can never be recovered.
Jan and Abid and Loida, thank you so much for being part of this program today. We really appreciate your time. Take care, everybody.